Good evening. I'm going to continue. Something fell down over there, but it wasn't anything to do with what I'm dealing with now. It was a wire, I think a plug-in wire of a mobile phone or something. I'm going to do the Butler's Lives of the Saints for May the 4th. I'm a bit behind. If I'm okay, I'll continue reading on, but I only recorded the 3rd of May the other day. Just get to feel warm now. So I'll just say, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Holy Michael, Archangel, defend me in this day of battle. Be my safeguard against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, I humbly pray. And do thou, Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, thrust down to hell Satan and all the wicked evil spirits who wander through the world for the ruin of souls. Amen. So, it wasn't May that I did, it was July. This book is to August, so I believe, I'll just check on what I don't mark these books ever. So, it will be the Lives of the Saints for July the 4th. These are the anniversaries of their deaths usually. So the first saint is Saint Bertha, widow. She died in 725. This Bertha, because there's obviously more than one, as there are other saints with very same names, this Bertha, at 20 years of age, married a nobleman by whom she had 5 daughters. After her husband's death, she retired to the nunnery which she had built at Blangy. It's like a spider's on my glasses or something. Sorry. There's something like really tiny. And I don't like spiders and things. I'm not even sure what it is. But it's there. It's gone now. Like an ant or a spider. I don't know what it was, but I don't like creepy crawlies on my glasses. Oh dear. Sorry about that. So she retired to the nunnery which she had built at Blangy in Artois with her 2 elder daughters, Gertrude and Dio Tyler. After establishing regular observance in her community, she left Dio Tyler abbess in her stead and shut herself in a cell to be employed only in prayer. No confidence can, however, be put in the historical accuracy of these particulars, for which the evidence is very late and unreliable. Another story of her pursuit by a certain Roger, who wished to marry her by force, is equally worthless. The so-called life is printed in the Acta Sanctorum, July, Volume 2. See also Van der Essen, Etude Critique, 420 to 421. So we didn't learn anything about her much, did we? So we'll now move on to St. Andrew of Crete. He was Archbishop of Gortyna, AD 740 ? This Andrew was born at Damascus about the middle of the 7th century. In contrast with the ready tongue of his later years, he is said to have been quite dumb until he received Holy Communion when he was 7 years old. At the age of 15, he went to Jerusalem, after which city he is sometimes named, and became a monk of Saint Sabas and of the Holy Sepulchre, which happens to be in Gaza, Palestine, and under threat. And the Church in aid of the Catholic Church, from our church, we sent £1,000 from a Sunday collection specially for it. And I think we had a fair, like tea and raffles and things like that. And they added to the fund. So it's a good thing to use the Church in aid for those things. So the Holy Sepulchre, that's where it was based when I was there, and it still is, where he received the orders of lector and subdeacon. He, in 685, was sent to Constantinople by Theodore, Patriarch of Jerusalem, to reiterate the adhesion of his church to the Sixth Ecumenical Council, which had recently condemned the monothelite heresy. Andrew remained in the city and was ordained a deacon of the great church and put in charge of an orphanage and a hospice for old men. His character and all-round abilities caused him soon to be advanced to the bishopric of GORTYNA, the metropolitan see of Crete. Here he became himself involved in the final recrudescence of monothelism in 711. When Philippicus Bardanes seized the imperial throne, burned the acts of the Sixth Ecumenical Council, restored the names of those it had anathematized to the diptychs in the liturgy, and summoned a synod to approve his actions. Andrew was present at this synod in 712, but came to his senses in the following year, and doubtless associated himself with the long letter of apology and explanation pleading force majeure, which his patriarch sent to Pope Constantine, when the Orthodox Anastasius II had driven out Bardanes. For the rest of his life, St. Andrew distinguished himself as a preacher and biographer. Oh, actually, I've got that wrong. It's hymnographer. I'm sorry in my ignorance, but I'd never heard, and I suppose it's someone in charge of hymns, so it's an old word for me, because I expect it's in the dictionary. More than 20 of his discourses are extant, which have been edited and published, but it is as a writer of hymns that he has left a permanent mark on the Byzantine liturgy, and obviously their hymns and singing is marvellous. You can hear it on YouTube and it's really beautiful. He is said to have introduced that form of hymnody called canon, K-A-N-O-N. Certain it is that he wrote a large number. The canon is a form that lends itself to empty verbosity. St. Andrew himself wrote one of the 250 strophes sung in Lent, with much hard work and weariness of the lungs, wrote Combeferre. St. Andrew's homilies are of importance in the history of the development of Mariology. The saint must not be confused with another Andrew of Crete, the CALYBITE, whose feast day is October the 17th. The Panegyric of Nicetas Quaestor BHG 16 tells us something of the life of St. Andrew, and there's a whole lot of little words which are too small for me to read. So I'm now going to go on to the Archbishop of Canterbury, St. Odo, ODO, AD 959. Odo was born in East Anglia. I live in East Anglia, but Norfolk part, of Danish parents. While Bishop of Ramsbury, he was present at the great battle of Bruanburh, when King Athelstan defeated the Danes, Northumbrian and Scots, and shortly afterwards was translated, that means moved, to the See of Canterbury. As Archbishop, he was very active in both civil and ecclesiastical affairs. He made his native East Anglia into a separate diocese and encouraged the monastic reforms of St. Dunstan at Glastonbury. Odo himself had received the religious habit at Fleury-sur-Loire. He was popularly known as Odo the Good, and several miracles are recorded of him, one of which at Canterbury was a demonstration of the real presence against some doubting clergy. He died in 959, having lived in the reigns of 6 kings, and his name appears in several ancient calendars of the church in Canterbury. And in small letters, which has not got so many interruptions, it says, "The most reliable information about St. Odo comes from the life of his nephew, St. Oswald of York, by a contemporary monk of Ramsey. It is printed in Historians of the Church of York in the Rolls series. A Life of Odo himself by Edemer, Acta Sanctorum, July, Volume 2, is valuable, but much later in date. And you can also see DNB Volume XLI. Odo's prefatory epistle to Frithgod's metrical life of St. Wilfrid is a curiosity of Anglo-Saxon learning. That's it of him. So now we're going to look at St. Ulric, ULRIC, Bishop of Augsburg, like Aug, AUGSBURG. He died AD 973. St. Ulric was born at Augsburg in 890 and was educated in the Abbey of St. Gall. St. Wiborada, a recluse who lived near the monastery, is said to have foretold that he would one day be a bishop and would meet with severe trials, though the young man was so delicate that others who knew him judged he could never live long. Regularity and temperance preserved a life, and everything moved, and I was getting a bit worried about it all going on the floor. So I'll just backtrack. Regularity and temperance preserved a life and strengthened a constitution which the excessive tenderness of parents and care of physicians would probably have worn out, a thing which Cardinal Lugo shows by several instances to have often happened in austere religious orders. When he had made progress in his studies, his father removed him to Augsburg, where he placed him under the care of his uncle, St. Adalbero, bishop of that city. And in due course, Ulrich himself was raised to the see. The Magyars, that's spelled Magyars, Magyars, had lately pillaged the country, murdered his old friend Wiborada, plundered Augsburg, and burnt the cathedral. The new bishop, not to lose time, built for the present a small church, in which he assembled the people who in their distress stood in extreme need of instruction, comfort, and relief, all which they found abundantly in Ulrich, who devoted himself, so far as his other obligations would allow, entirely to his spiritual functions. He rose every morning at 3 o'clock to assist at matins and lauds, and only left the church after, they've put none, but they must mean noon. Then he went to the hospital, where he comforted the sick, and every day washed the feet of 12 poor people, giving each of them a liberal alms. The rest of the day he employed in instructing, preaching, visiting, and discharging all the duties of a vigilant pastor. He made every year the visit of his whole diocese. During his last years, the saint earnestly desired to resign his bishopric and retire to the monastery of St. Gall, and with this object appointed his nephew Adalbero in his place. This was judged to be an uncanonical act, for which he had to answer before a synod at Ingelheim. In his last illness, Ulrich caused himself to be laid on ashes strewed on the floor in the form of a cross, and thus he died amidst the prayers of his clergy on July the 4th, 973. Miracles were recorded at his tomb, and he was canonized by Pope John the 15th in 993, the first solemn canonization by a pope of which there is a record. Abundant materials are available for the life of Saint Ulrich. The most important is the biography by the provost, Gerhard, a contemporary printed in the Acta Sanctorum, July, Volume 2. The rest of it is far too small and too much of it for me to read. So I'll continue to read now with an abbot, Blessed William of HIRSCHAU, which is spelled HIRSH, no, my apologies, I'll begin again. HIRSCHAU, HIRSCHAU, AD 1091. In the year 1065, Blessed Frederick, a monk of Einsiedeln, was sent with 12 companions to repeople the abbey of HIRSCHAU in Württemberg, which for 60 years had been in the hands of the counts of Calw, CALW, and was falling into decay. Pope St. Leo IX, who belonged to the family of Calwa, had ordered Count Adalbert to restore the abbey to the Benedictines, which he did very slowly and with a bad grace, and obtained such an influence over part of the new community that after 4 years they deposed Frederick. In his place was elected William, a monk of the Abbey of St. Emmeram at Ratisbon, who protested against the deposition of Blessed Frederick and refused to regard himself as other than his vicar until after his death. After dealing with Count Adalbert, Abbot William turned his attention to the reform of his monks and the building up of a stable and observant community. Bernard, abbot of St. Victor at Marseille, who had been sent into Germany as papal legate, advised him to adopt the usages and observance of Cluny, which William accordingly did. His own personal reputation attracted numbers of suitable subjects, and he was able to re-establish the school for which HIRSCHAU had formerly been famous. And knowing that idleness is a chief enemy of monks, and that good books cannot be too often multiplied, he staffed a large scriptorium. He himself drew up the constitutions of HIRSCHAU, which for long remained the norm of observance in that monastery and in many others, and set an example of such careful observance of them that he completely reformed his own community and attracted so many aspirants that other monasteries had to be founded for them. One of the outstanding characteristics of William's life, and one by no means shared by all the great abbots of the Middle Ages, was his concern for the spiritual and material well-being of the serfs, both of the monastery and of neighbouring manors, and by aggregating its servants to the monastic community, he had a significant part in the development of the institution of Fratris Conversi, that's lay brothers. Blessed William strongly appreciated the value of learning, and had seen how often bad morals go with lack of instruction and of intelligence. Hence, on the one hand, his interest in the schooling of the common people, and on the other, his urgency for a learned episcopate. When asked to recommend men suitable for a bishopric, he always, other things being equal, named a scholar. His own accomplishments after that science of the saints, knowledge of God, and holy living, in which he excelled, were of variousness more common in his time than in ours. Astronomy, music, mathematics, poetry. He invented an ingenious clock, revised and rewrote several of the office hymns, and among other works wrote a treatise, De Musica et Tunis. But his great public work was the establishment of his school of the Lord's service, whose character he wrote down in the constitutions which continued to be in force at HIRSCHAU until the beginning of the 15th century. We now leave that saint and we go on to Blesseds John Cornelius and his companions and their martyrs. Oh, this will be a bit grim, eh? The Dorchester Martyrs, AD 1594. On July the 4th, 1594, was hanged, drawn and quartered at Dorchester in Dorset Blessed John Cornelius, alias Mohun, priest, and with him were simply hanged Blessed Thomas Bosgrave, John Carey, and Patrick Salmon, laymen. Mr. Cornelius was born of Irish parents at Bodmin in 1557 and was sent to Oxford by Sir John Arundel of Lanherne, but not liking the new learning of that university, he went overseas to the English College at Reims and afterwards to Rome, where he was ordained. He worked on the English mission from Lanherne for nearly 10 years, and both then and during his earlier days abroad, he was known as a man of unusual zeal and recollection. On April 25th, 1594, he was arrested at Chidiock Castle, the seat of Lady Arundel, by the Sheriff of Dorset. While he was being hurried away, bareheaded, and unprepared, Mr. Thomas Bosgrave, a gentleman of Cornwall, nephew of Sir John Arundel, offered him his hat, saying, "The honour I owe to your function may not suffer me to see you go bareheaded." This innocent act of kindness and respect was sufficient to implicate him, and he also was arrested. At the same time were carried off two of the castle serving men, John Carey and Patrick Salmon, both Dubliners. Cornelius was taken to London and examined before the Privy Council, which ordered him to be racked that he might betray the names of those who had harboured or assisted him. After sentence had been pronounced, they were offered a reprieve if they would apostatize. 2 days later, they were executed. The laymen, each of whom made a final profession of faith, suffered first. Blessed John Cornelius kissed the feet of his companions, but was not allowed to speak to the people. He was, however, able to declare that he had been admitted into the Society of Jesus and would have gone to Flanders for his novitiate, but for his arrest. There also suffered at Dorchester Blessed Hugh Green, a secular priest who on August the 19th, 1642, was hanged, drawn and quartered, with peculiarly revolting circumstances for his priesthood. I'm glad they didn't write it down. The feast of the Dorchester Martyrs is kept in the Diocese of Plymouth, but fuller details concerning these martyrs may be found in an article contributed by Father Leo Hicks to Studies, December 1929. I'm glad it's not in this book. Sorry, but my stomach at this time of night don't think I'd like to read the grim things that are sometimes in the books. So we're now on Blessed William Andleby and his companions, also martyrs, AD 1597. This is also on July the 4th. On July the 4th, 1597, there suffered at York Blessed William Andleby, a secular priest, and Blessed Henry Abbot, Thomas Walcott, and Edward Fulthrop, laymen. Mr. Andleby, or it's spelt another way as well, Anleby, was born at Eton near Beverley, and brought up a Protestant, being educated at St. John's College, Cambridge. When some 25 years old, while on his way to join the Dutch in their wars with the Spaniards, he visited Douai and had an interview with Dr. Allen. Within 24 hours, the prayers and discourses of the rector of the seminary had such an effect on the young man, who hitherto had been strongly averse from the church, and even from religion at all in his behaviour, that he not only made his submission, but remained in Douai, and was in due course ordained in 1577. He worked on the mission in Yorkshire and Lincolnshire for 20 years, and was concerned with the Venerable Thomas Atkinson in ministering under conditions of the greatest difficulty and danger to the Catholic prisoners in Hull Castle. He was at last arrested and condemned to be hanged, drawn, and quartered for being a priest. The same death was inflicted on Edward Fulthrop, a Yorkshire gentleman, for having been reconciled to the church, and Thomas Walcott was hanged for sheltering Mr. Andleby. Henry Abbott of Holden in the East Riding was hanged, drawn, and quartered for persuading another to join the Catholic Church. Into this he had been tricked by a Protestant minister who, being imprisoned in York Castle for some offence or other, had pretended that he wished to abjure his heresy, to ingratiate himself with some recusant fellow prisoners. These, at his release, referred him to Mr. Abbot as a likely person to know of a priest who would reconcile him. At the minister's request, therefore, Abbot tried to find one at a certain house, and though he did not succeed, this was sufficient to ensure his death, and that of the recusants in the jail, the Venerable George Errington, William Knight, and William Gibson, when the treacherous minister had commended himself to his superiors by informing on those whom he had deceived. What utter wickedness! So we're now on July the 5th, and the saint is Anthony, with no H, Zachariah. He is the founder of the Clerks Regular of St. Paul, A.D. 1539. The early part of the 16th century, before the Council of Trent, was one of the saddest periods of the Church's history. Nevertheless, it produced some figures of outstanding sanctity and beauty, and among these, that of Anthony Mary Zachariah is one of the noblest. He was born at Cremona in 1502, and his father died while he was yet young. But his mother made admirable compensation for that early loss, and in particular encouraged that side of her son's character which was moved to compassion by the sufferings of the poor. He was sent to the University of Padua to study medicine. When he was 22, he graduated and returned to his home to practice. Here he soon learned that his vocation was to heal souls as well as bodies, and he began seriously to study theology, meantime continuing to exercise his profession, to give spiritual help to the dying, to teach Christian doctrine to the young, and to be at the service of all. In 1528, he was ordained priest, and his spiritual and corporal ministry was so successful that he was encouraged to extend its possibilities by removing to the bigger city of Milan. I've been there, it's really beautiful. Here Anthony joined the Confraternity of Eternal Wisdom and met people like-minded with himself, among them Louisa Torelli, Countess of Guastalla, who under his direction founded the congregation of women called the Angelicals for the protection and rescue of girls who were in danger or had fallen into evil ways. These sisters were an auxiliary of the saint in all his works of mercy. In 1530, he decided, with two other priests, the Venerable Bartholomew Ferrari and Venerable James Morigia, to start a body of clerks, regular priests who are bound by rule and vows, but are neither monks nor friars, whose object should be to regenerate and revive the love of divine worship and a properly Christian way of life by frequent preaching and faithful ministering of the sacraments. This was done with 5 members who preached in any place, church or street, and particularly on our Lord's Passion and death for men, of which St. Anthony reminded people every Friday evening by the tolling of a bell. While Luther was attacking both the truths of the faith and the iniquities of churchmen, while the people were oppressed physically by the wars which ravaged Italy, and spiritually by the neglect of the clergy, this faithful band laboured heroically to reform the church from within, by reviving the Christian spirit and care for souls among the clergy, and by ministering to the dual needs of the laity. They worked among the plague-stricken Milanese and infused such vigour into the spiritual life of their city that in 1533 the new congregation was approved by Pope Clement VII under the name of the Clerks Regular of St. Paul. The founder was its first Provost General, but 3 years later he resigned the office to Father Morigia and went to inaugurate its work at Vicenza, where he is said to have introduced from Milan the custom of exposing the Blessed Sacrament for 3 continuous days, so they'd need someone there night and day. In the last year of his life, St. Anthony acquired for the headquarters of his congregation, the Church of St. Barnabas at Milan, whence the common name of Barnabites for his followers. While on a mission at Guastalla, he was taken ill, and his body worn out by mortifications and unceasing work. He quickly became worse. He was carried to his mother's house at Cremona and there died at the age of only 37. He was canonized by Pope Leo XIII in 1897. After considerable troubles in their early days, the Barnabites prospered, but have never been a large order. They still labour in modest obscurity among the outcasts of great towns. They educate, for wherever is a Barnabite community, there is a centre of learning, and following their founder, they preach the gospel with special reference to the epistles of St. Paul. So the next saint for this same date, the 5th of July, is St. Athanasius, the Athonite abbot, AD 1000. For 1,000 years, Athos, the holy mountain, the most easterly of the three large headlands which the peninsula of Chalcidice thrusts out into the Aegean Sea, had been the chief centre of Byzantine monasticism. For nearly all that time, this monastic republic has been out of communion with the Holy See. But at the time of its inception and organisation, and during the preceding centuries, when it was occupied by little colonies of hermits, Athos was Catholic and a stronghold of orthodoxy in a different sense from that in which it is so today. The father of Mount Athos as a congeries of regular monasteries was one Athanasius, who was born at Trebizond, about the year 920. The son of an Antiochene and baptized Abraham. He studied at Constantinople, where he became a professor, and while he was teaching, he met Saint Michael Malinos and his nephew Nicephorus Phocas, Phocas then, Phocas, Phocas, I don't know if it's a silent H, is it? Who, as emperor, he was an emperor, as emperor was to be Abraham's patron. He received the monastic habit in St. Michael's Monastery at Kymena in Bithynia, taking the name of Athanasius, and lived there till about the year 958. Kymena was a Laura, the name then reserved for monasteries, wherein the monks lived in separate cells, grouped more or less closely round their church. When the abbot St. Michael Malinos died, Athanasius saw that he would be pretty surely elected in his place. He therefore fled, ran away, and eventually found his way to Mount Athos to avoid this responsibility. I wonder if the same will happen to him like with Jonah, something will happen and drag him back. I don't know, I'm just surmising. He therefore fled, eventually found his way to Mount Athos to avoid this. He didn't want to be responsible for the others, only to find that God was reserving him for a greater, something greater. He disguised himself as an ignorant fellow, assuming the name of Dorotheos. Oh, he tried to be a woman, did he? And hid in a cell near Car. Yes, he was soon traced and found by his friend, some friend that, Nicephorus Phocas. I'm sorry the way it sounds, it's very funny. He was about to undertake an expedition against the Saracens and persuaded Athanasius to come to Crete to help him organize it. He so often found that the contemplative soul is a capable man of affairs, which after all is only to be expected, and to support it with his blessings and prayers. Athanasius was very unwilling. He was unwilling to make this sally out into the world and its concerns, but he went. The expedition was victorious, and Athanasius asked permission to return to Athos. But before he was allowed to, he was forced to accept a large sum of money with which he was to build a monastery. This, the first monastery proper on Athos, it's very famous, was begun in the spring of 961. And the church, 2 years later, it was dedicated in honour of the All-Holy Mother of God, but is now called of Saint Athanasius, or more often simply Laura, the monastery. When Nicephorus Phocas became emperor, Athanasius feared that he might be called to court or to other honours and disturbing offices, so he ran away from Athos to Cyprus. I've been there too. Phocas again found him and told him to go back and govern his monastery in peace, giving him more money, with which was built a harbour for Athos. In adopting the Laura system for his monks, Athanasius had deliberately reversed the policy of St. Basil and St. Theodora Studites, and returned in a measure to the ancient monastic tradition of Egypt. His monks were to be as out of the world as is possible for human beings even now. The Athonite monks are still extraordinarily out of touch with things as a general rule, but in spite of this, he was involved in great difficulties with the solitaries who had been on Athos long before he came, and who felt understandably that generations of predecessors had given them a prescriptive right to have the place to themselves. They resented his coming there and building monasteries and churches and harbours, imposing rules and keeping order generally. Twice attempts were made to murder St. Athanasius. These are supposed to be monks. Can you imagine that? They wanted to murder him. Well, I never did. This is incredible. So I've lost my place laughing over this. So I've got to see how far down the page I got, because this is very small writing. Okay. I've lost my place laughing. I do apologise. Yes, I'm halfway there. Twice attempts were made to murder St. Athanasius. Criminal violence spoils the best of causes, and the Emperor John Tzimices, it's Tzimmisces, Tzimices, interfered. He confirmed the donations and rights granted by Nicephorus Phocas, forbade opposition to Athanasius, and recognised his authority over the whole of the mountain and its inhabitants. He thus became superior general over 58 communities of hermits and monks, and the monasteries of Iveron, Vatopedi and Esphigmenou were founded, which still exist as living communities. St. Athanasius died about the year 1000, being killed with 5 of his monks by the falling of a keystone of the vault of the church on which they were working. What an odd death. How odd is that? I better read it again. Being killed with 5 of his monks by the falling of a keystone of the vault of the church on which they were working. They didn't have equipment in those days like they do now. He is named daily in the preparation of the Byzantine liturgy and is sometimes called the Loriote or Trebizond. There exists a very full Greek life of St. Athanasius, the Athanite, which was edited in Russia by, they're not favourite at the moment, are they? By J. Pomyalovsky in 1895. I've got nothing against them. The author was a monk, also named Athanasius, who lived in close relation with the saint's immediate successor in office. Another long biography in Greek, based upon the earlier text, was published by L. Petit in Analecta Bollandia, volume XXV, 1906. There's a lot more stuff about that, but I'm not going to read it. So we're now on July the 6th. St. Romulus, Bishop of Fiesole, martyr, AD 90 ? But it obviously is around about that time. According to a late tradition, the apostle and the first bishop of Fiesole was Romulus, a Roman convert of St. Peter, who was martyred under Domitian. Nothing is known of him historically, and his name was added to the Roman martyrology only in the 16th century. St. Romulus is the hero of a rather tiresome romance of uncertain provenance, but seemingly a work of fiction of not earlier than the 11th century. In this we are told that a certain citizen of Rome had a daughter named Lucerna, who gave her affections and herself to one of her father's slaves, Cyrus. By him a son was born to her, whom she abandoned in a wood, where the baby was adopted. And if you believe this, pigs can fly, but you never know. But they do make, like, oh, this is incredible. And was adopted and suckled by a wolf, a female wolf it must be. The unnatural sight was seen by some verderers, not murderers, verderers. I don't know what verderers are. Forgive my ignorance, but they must be looking for green stuff or something. What are verderers? I'll have to look that up. Verderers. Verderers. Sounds like murderers. If you want to type it up and you speak into something, it'd come out like murderers, wouldn't it? Verderers of the Emperor Nero, who reported it to him and were ordered to capture the child. For 3 days the hunt pursued the couple without catching them, whereupon the emperor consulted St. Peter. Peter provided himself and some fellow Christians with fishing nets and went into the wood, where they were confronted by the child and his foster mother. So his foster mother, they're alleging, is a female wolf, a she-wolf. Well, they're pretty tough. Peter adjured the boy, "If you're born of a wolf, go hence. But if of a human woman, come to me." The quarry did not stir. The Christians shot their nets, and 2 were caught and safely shut up. To eat, they gave them a sheep, which the wolf straightway killed, and both fed on its raw flesh. Yeah. Thereupon St. Peter ordered the wolf to be liberated and driven off, and the child was baptized. At the suggestion of Peter's companion, Justin it was, with a nice appropriateness, given the name of Romulus. He was civilized and educated first by a noble Roman lady, and then by the same Justin, and at 8 years of age, this prodigy was preaching, exorcising and working miracles. So it was not, must be the help of the wolf, eh? So Romulus was later consecrated bishop. He evangelized at Fiesole, Sutri, Nepi, Florence, Pistoria, etc. And after sundry adventures and doing of marvels, he was ordered to be put to death by the governor Repertian, Repertin. On the way to execution, Romulus begged a drink of water from a girl at a wayside spring. She, for fear of the soldiers, refused, and the martyr rebuked her and ordained that for the future the spring should still run fresh water for Christians, but to every heathen man drinking of it should be turned to blood. With St. Romulus were executed Carisimus, Dulcimus, and Crescentius. These stories, they beg a belief, don't they? That's why I like reading them. This is the most amazing one to date for a long while. But the wolf business, and then this other business, and how he turned out. I mean, it's incredible. It's at the bottom, it's got a little footnote, which I'm definitely going to struggle to read. It's a curious fact that despite the wild extravagance of the above legend, there is evidence of the historical essence and the early cultus of a Saint Romulus at Fiesole. The story has been critically studied by A. Cocci, San Remola Vescova di Fiesole, Storia Legend 1905. The one element of historical interest is a fragmentary epitaph said to be the end of the 4th century. So who knows whether it was just a made-up story or how the heck it got in here. But you can make a note of the name. Saint Romulus, Romulus, Bishop of Fiesole, martyr. So he was killed. Fiesole, martyr. And they got a question mark about when he was killed, 90. So that St. Peter allegedly is in this, still alive, because 90 years, it's not impossible. We don't know how old, do we, when St. Peter died? Anyway, I will continue. It's rather amusing, some of these saint stories, they really are. I mean, you couldn't make them up, could you? You just couldn't make them up. July the 6th we're on. So this one is called Saint Dominica, Virgin and Martyr, AD 303, this lady. Question mark though. It's very short. This is the best known of several saints of the name, but her existence, so far as the Western legend is concerned, is more than doubtful. Baronius inserted her name in the Roman martyrology with this notice: in Campania of the Holy Dominica, virgin and martyr, who was a breaker of idols under the Emperor Diocletian, and was therefore condemned to the beasts. But being not at all hurt by them, she was at last beheaded and passed to the Lord. Her body is preserved with great honour at Tropea in Calabria. The lessons of her office tell us further that she was born in the Campagna, suffered on the banks of the Euphrates, and that her body was carried by angels to Tropea. But in that city it is said that she was born, lived, and died there, whereas actually she seems to have been unheard of there before the 16th century. It is possible that she must be identified with Saint Cyriaca, and it's got it in a sort of Russian or Greek script, Dominica, a virgin martyr, whom the Byzantines venerate on July the 7th. Her acts are worthless, but they state that she suffered by beheading at Nicomedia in Bithynia. What started her cultus at Tropea, or whether there is a confusion of the two Dominicas, is not known. What little can be said in defence of the legend will be found in a booklet by Monsignor Tacconi Gallucci, Memoria Storica di Santa Domenica, 1893. I doubt if we can track that down. So, Saint Sisoes, this is a weird name, Sisoes, Sisoes, Saint Sisoes, Sisoes, AD 429. After the death of Saint Anthony, Saint Sisoes was one of the most shining lights of the Egyptian deserts. He was an Egyptian by birth, and having quitted the world in his youth, he retired to the desert of Skeet. The desire of finding a more unfrequented retreat induced him to cross the Nile and hide himself in the mountain where Saint Anthony had died, and the memory of that great man's virtues wonderfully supported his fervour and encouraged him to persevere. He imagined he saw him and heard the instructions he was wont to deliver to his disciples, and he strained every nerve to imitate his most heroic exercises, the austerity of his penance, the rigour of his silence, the ardour of his prayer, so that the reputation of Sisoes spread among the neighbouring solitaries, and some came a great distance to be guided in the ways of perfection, and he was forced to submit his love of silence and retreat to the greater duty of charity. His zeal against vice was without bitterness, and when his disciples fell into faults, he did not affect astonishment or the language of reproach, but helped them to rise again with patience and tenderness. Sisoes, in all his advice and instruction, held out humility constantly as a most necessary virtue. A recluse saying to him one day, "Father, I always place myself in the presence of God," He replied, "It would be much better for you to put yourself below every creature in order to be securely humble." Thus, while he never lost sight of the divine presence, it was ever accompanied with the consciousness of his own worthlessness. To another who complained that he had not yet arrived at the perfection of St. Anthony, he said, "Ah, if I had but one only of that man's feelings, I should be one flame of divine love." On a visit of 3 solitaries waiting instruction, one of them said, Father, what shall I do to avoid hellfire?" Cisos made no reply. "How shall I?" asked another. "Escape the gnashing of teeth and the worm that dieth not." "What will become of me?" asked the third. "For every time I think of outer darkness, I'm ready to die with fear." Then the saint answered, "I confess that these are subjects which I never think about, and as I know that God is merciful, I trust he will have compassion on me. You are happy," he added, "and I envy your virtue. You speak of the torments of hell, and your fears must be strong guards against sin. It is I should exclaim, 'What shall become of me?' For I'm so insensible as never even to reflect on the place of torment. This perhaps is the reason I am guilty of so much sin." He said another time, "I am now 30 years praying daily that my Lord Jesus may preserve me from saying an idle word, and yet I am always relapsing." Being at length worn out with sickness and old age, Cisos yielded to his disciple Abraham's advice and went to reside a while at Clysma, a town near the Red Sea. Here he received a visit from Amon, abbot of Raithu, who, seeing him miserable at being absent from his retreat, tried to comfort him by pointing out that his present state of health wanted the remedies which could not be had in the desert. "What do you say?" replied the saint. "Was not the ease of mind I enjoyed there everything for my comfort?" And he was not at ease till he returned to his retreat. The solitaries assisting at his deathbed heard him cry out, "Behold, Abbot Anthony, the choir of prophets and the angels are come to take my soul." At the same time his countenance shone, and being some time interiorly recollected with God, he cried out anew, "Behold, our Lord comes for me!" And so he died, about the year 429, after a retreat of at least 62 years in St. Anthony's Mount. His feast is observed in the Byzantine calendar. This saint must not be confused with another Cisos surnamed the Theban, who lived at the same age at Calamon in the territory of Arsinoe. It is related of him that a certain recluse, having received some offence, went to tell him that he must be avenged. The holy old man recommended him to leave his revenge to God, to pardon his brother, and forget the injury. But seeing that his advice had no weight, at least, said he, let us both join in speaking to God. Then, standing up, he prayed thus aloud, O Lord, we no longer want your care of our interests or your protection, since this monk maintains that we can and ought to be our own avengers. What we know of St. Sissos comes to us mainly through the Apothematica Data Patrum, a collection of utterances of the Fathers of the Desert, to which of late years much attention has been devoted. See particularly W. Bousset. There's all these funny names. I'm not going to read them. Too little, too difficult. So the next saint's name is really weird. Saint Goar, Goar, Saint Goar, AD 575. Goar was born in Aquitaine and for years worked as a parish priest in his own country. But he heard the call of solitude and eventually settled down on the banks of the Rhine, near the small town of Oberwessel. Here he lived for years in quietness, till it happened to him as it happened to so many other solitaries. He was discovered, and people came to consult him. The peasants of the neighbourhood were particularly fond of him. They listened to his preaching, wondered at his way of life, marvelled at his holiness and patience, and then went away and attributed all sorts of miracles to him. Probably no notice would have been taken had he not been a priest, but some busybody reported his irregular ministry to the Bishop of Trier, and evil-disposed persons added the information that the holy hermit was a humbug, who overate himself, got drunk, and deceived the people, which none of it was true, obviously. The bishop, Rusticus, thereupon sent for Goar, who obediently came and was accused not only of hypocrisy, but of sorcery and other crimes. How he cleared himself is not known. According to the legend, God himself interfered and caused a 3-day-old child not only to vindicate the hermit, sounds like the child where the two horrible old men tried to accuse the wife of laying with a young man, which wasn't true. And was it Daniel? I'm not sure who the boy, but one youngster who was young shouted out he didn't want her blood on his hands. Sounds like that this fellow had something like that happen. So I'll carry on. It said, this 3-day-old child, not only to vindicate the hermit, but also to convict the bishop of most irregular living. There was at once an outcry, and Sigebert I, king of Austrasia, hearing what had happened, sent for St. Goar to come to him at Metz. The hermit's modesty and innocence greatly impressed the king, and having deposed the unworthy Rusticus, he wished to put him in his place. But the idea of being a bishop so upset Goar that he was taken ill. He asked for time to think it over, and went back to his cell, where death overtook him before the king succeeded in getting his acceptance. His home became a place of pilgrimage, and is now marked by a small town which bears his name and has a church dedicated in his honour. The curious legend of St. Goar, in the form in which we have it here, is probably older than 768, but it cannot be regarded as a historical document. There can have been no Rusticus, Bishop of Trier, in the time of Childebert and Sigebert I. The primitive text, in a very barbarous Latin, has been critically edited by B. Crush. Anyway, the rest of it is too small a print. Well, it was fascinating, wasn't it, that story? Saint Goa, AD 575. So the next one is a very funny title for a saint. Saint Sexburger, Sexburga. Saint Sexburg. I wouldn't want that name at all. It's not appropriate, is it? Saint Sexburger, Abbess of Ely. Well, Ely's near here, is it? Is it Ely in East Anglia, where it is? Norfolk here, where I am? Well, I have to read this one, definitely. Widow, AD 699. It's possible, because Ely was an island. It had a lot of water and sort of thing around it then. Well, it's probably not a lot better now. Right, yes, it is the East Angles. So, yeah, I've got to read this saint. Saint Sexburger. Sorry. Saint Sexburger was the daughter of Anna, king of the East Angles, and therefore the sister of Saints Ethelreda, Ethelberga, and Withburger, and half-sister of Saint Sethreda. Well, that may be why they've given her this weird name. She was given in marriage to Erconbert, king of Kent, a prince of excellent dispositions, which she contributed for 24 years to improve by her counsels and example. Her virtue commanded the reverence, and her humility and devotion raised the admiration of her subjects, and her goodness and charity gained her the love of all. She became the mother of 2 princes and 2 saints, Ercongota and Ermenilda, because she had a longing to consecrate herself wholly to God in religious retirement, and that the others might attend divine service without impediment. She began in her husband's lifetime to found a monastery at Minster in the Isle of Sheppey, which she finished after his death in 664. Here she assembled 74 nuns and herself joined them. After some years, she appointed her daughter Ermenilda to rule the house, and being desirous to live in greater obscurity and to be more at liberty to employ all her thoughts on heaven, she left Kent and went to the Abbey of Ely. It's a wonderful cathedral still there, where she was chosen to succeed her sister, Saint Ethelreda, in the government of that house. 16 years after she caused the body of that saint to be taken up, when it was found incorrupt and was enshrined in a white marble coffin found at Cambridge, Sexburger herself passed to bliss in a good old age on July the 6th at the end of the 7th century. Her monastery of Minster in Sheppey was destroyed by the Danes, but rebuilt in 1130 and consecrated in honour of Our Lady, and Saint Sexburger continuing to be occupied by Benedictine nuns until the dissolution. She was also honoured in Sweden. I'm not going to read any of the small print. The next saint, 7th century, ? No dates of anything. Her name is Modwena Wena Virgin, Saint Modwena Virgin. The Saint Modwena or Monena Monena, formerly venerated at Burton-on-Trent and elsewhere, may have lived in the middle of the 17th century and become a recluse on an islet called Anglesey in the Trent. But not only are other and conflicting things alleged of her, but her legend has been conflated with that of the Irish Saint Dareca or Monine, said to have been the first abbess of CALYBITE near Newry, and to have died in 517. And she has perhaps been confused with others as well. Capgrave and others speak of St. Modwenna as having charge of St. Edith of Polesworth, which, were it true, would throw no useful light on either saint. The most valuable information we possess about St. Monine seems to be the entry in the Felire of Oengus. Monine of the mountain of Culen was a fair pillar. She gained a triumph, a hostage of purity, a kinswoman of great Mary with the gloss. And they've got little bits here. It would seem hopeless to unravel the tangle, so I think we'll leave it at that. And the next saint is a martyr, AD 1070 ? And the name is rather strange. Saint Godeliva, Godelieva, martyr. There's not much written here, but there's a little bit. According to the narrative written by a contemporary priest, Drogo, the story of Godeliva is an example of that wanton persecution and cruelty shown towards an innocent victim, which is as shocking to reasonable, not to say Christian human beings, as it is unexplainable. No adequate motive is given or even suggested for the behaviour of the offender at first, though afterwards his desire to get rid of his wife is clear enough. Godeliva was born at Londefort-les-Boulogne about 1049. Of noble parentage, she grew up beautiful both in person and character, and was particularly beloved by the poor, to whose welfare she constantly devoted herself. At the age of 18, she married a Flemish lord, Bertulf of Gistellers, who conducted his bride home, where she was received with insults by his mother. Apparently she had had other plans for her son, and was furious that he had disregarded them in favour of this girl from the Boulonnais. Bertulf, the days of the wedding festivities yet unfinished, deserted Godeliva, leaving her in charge of his mother, who was not content with petty persecutions, but treated her, who should have been mistress of the house, with fanatic brutality. She at length contrived to escape and return to her parents, who took the case to the Count of Flanders and the Bishop of Tournai. It was ruled that Bertulf should receive back his wife and henceforward treat her properly, which he promised to do. But once she was back at Gistellers, Bertulf was first indifferent, then again openly violent to her, and to get rid of her he resolved on more direct action. First of all, he shammed penitence and a desire for reconciliation, with the object both of averting suspicion from himself and to enable him the more easily to entrap the girl. Then at the appointed time Godiva was induced by a trick to go out of the castle by a back door at night. She was seized by two of Bertulf's servants and smothered by having her head held down in a pond, with a thong drawn tight round her neck. When she was dead, the ruffians replaced her body in bed, meaning it to be supposed she had died a natural death. It was obvious that she had not, but Bertulf had absented himself in Bruges at the time of the crime, and Godiva's parents were unable to bring it home to him. He at once married again, but his wickedness haunted him, and he ended his days in a monastery at Burgos St. Winoc. The scene of the murder of Godiva soon had a reputation for miracles, and the sudden recovery of sight by Bertulf's blind daughter by his second wife was attributed to her intercession. In 1084 her body was dug up and enshrined in the church, which is still a place of pilgrimage, the people drinking the water of her well and appropriately invoking her intercession against sore throats. It is difficult to see why, except in popular estimation, Godiva is venerated as a martyr. She did not endure death for any article of faith, or for the preservation of any Christian virtue, or for any other act of virtue relating to God, unless indeed her supernatural patience finally provoked her husband to his wicked violence. I'm not going to attempt to read the small print, so let me just have a quick look over the page and see how many more. We've only got, I'll do the two. We've got two more saints, and that will end this the 6th of July, because it's gone on a little bit, but I may as well make sure that I get to the end of the chapter. So, Blessed Thomas Allfield, martyr. Let's hope this is a proper one. Not that I want to read anything horrible, I don't. AD 1585. Thomas Allfield, his name is variously spelt, was born in Gloucester and educated at Eton and King's College, Cambridge. He was brought up a Protestant, and on becoming a Catholic went to Douai in 1576 to study for the priesthood. He was ordained at Reims in 1581 and sent on the English mission, where he was associated with Blessed Edmund Campion. By the spring of 1582 he was already in the Tower of London, and here he endured torture without failing, but later, for a short time, he succumbed to temptation and outwardly conformed to the established church. After his release, he withdrew to Reims, where he made amends, and then came back to England. In the early part of 1584, Alffield was concerned in a curious episode. He was employed by John Davies, the navigator, who explored for the Northwest Passage, to communicate an offer of his, Davies' services, to the court of Spain, a proposal that may be assumed not to have been seriously meant. Later in the year, with the help of Thomas Webley, also of Gloucester, and a dyer by trade, Allfield was busy circulating copies of Dr. Allen's True and Modest Defence, written in answer to Execution of Justice, in which Burleigh had sought to prove that Catholics were being proceeded against in England, not for their religion, but for treason.
This soon landed him in the Tower again, and both he and Webley were tortured, with the object of making them disclose to whom they had distributed the book. They were both tried and condemned for this offence, and were hanged at Tyburn on 6th of July 1585, after being offered their freedom if they would acknowledge the Queen's ecclesiastical leadership. A reprieve had in fact been issued for Blessed Thomas. It is not known why, but it arrived too late. A third man, who had been concerned with them, one Crabbe, C-R-A-B-B-E, purchased his life by apostasy. Allfield's brother Robert also became a renegade. Blessed Thomas Allfield was beatified in 1925. The Venerable Thomas Webley's cause is still under consideration. So the last saint is one I know very well, and I'm sure you all do. Saint Mary Goretti, Virgin and Martyr, AD 1902. Mary Goretti was born in 1890 at Corinaldo, a village some 30 miles from Ancona, the daughter of a farm labourer, Luigi Goretti, and his wife, Assunta Carlini. They had 5 other children, and in 1896 the family moved to Collegianturca near Galliano, and later to Ferraria de Conca, not far from Nettuno in the Roman Campagna. Almost at once after settling down here, Luigi Goretti was stricken with malaria and died. His widow had to take up his work as best she could, but it was a hard struggle, and every small coin and bit of food had to be looked at twice. Of all the children, none was more cheerful and encouraging to her mother than Mary, commonly called Marietta. On a hot afternoon in July 1902, Mary was sitting at the top of the stairs in the cottage, mending a shirt. She was not yet quite 12 years old, and it must be remembered that in Italy girls mature earlier than in more northern countries. Presently a cart stopped outside, and a neighbour, a young man of 18, named Alexander, ran up the stairs. He beckoned Mary into an adjoining bedroom, but this sort of thing had happened before, and she refused to go. Alexander seized hold of her, pulled her in, and shut the door. Mary struggled and tried to call for help, but she was being half strangled and could only protest hoarsely, gasping that she would be killed rather than submit. Whereupon Alexander half pulled her dress from her body and began striking at her blindly with a long dagger. She sank to the floor, crying out that she was being killed. Alexander plunged the dagger into her back and ran away. An ambulance fetched Mary to hospital, where it was seen at once that she could not possibly live. Her last hours were most touching. Her concern for where her mother was going to sleep, her forgiveness of her murderer, and she now disclosed that she had long been going in fear of him, but did not say anything lest she cause trouble with her family. Her childlike welcoming of the Holy Viaticum, some 24 hours after the assault, Mary Goretti died. Her mother, the parish priest of Nettuno, a Spanish noblewoman, and 2 nuns, had watched by her bed all night. Alexander was sentenced to 30 years penal servitude. For long he was surly, brutal, and unrepentant. Then, one night, he had a dream or a vision in which Mary Goretti appeared, gathering flowers and offering them to him. From then on, he was a changed man, and so exemplary a prisoner that at the end of 27 years he was released. His first act when free was to visit Mary's mother to beg her forgiveness. Meanwhile, the memory of his victim had become more and more revered. The sweetness and strength of her life before her untimely end was recalled. People prayed for her intercession in heaven. Answers, even miracles, were attributed to that intercession, and in response to a widespread wish, the cause of her beatification was introduced. On April 27th, 1947, Marie Goretti was declared blessed by Pope Pius XII. When he afterwards appeared on the balcony of St. Peter's, he was accompanied by Mary's mother, Assunta Goretti, then 82 years old, together with two of Mary's sisters and a brother. Pilgrims came from all over Italy, and the Pope addressed them, presenting Blessed Mary as a new St. Agnes and calling down woe on the corrupters of chastity in press and theatre and cinema and fashion studios. In our day, he said, women have been thrown even into military service with grave consequences. 3 years later, the same Pope canonized Marie Goretti in the piazza of St. Peter's before the biggest crowd ever assembled for a canonization. Her murderer was still alive. A number of popular canonizations of early times, notwithstanding a violent and unjust death alone, is not sufficient to constitute martyrdom. The common idea that St. Joan of Arc, for example, was a martyr is mistaken, but St. Mary Goretti was killed in defence of a Christian virtue, and so was every bit as much a martyr as if she had died for the Christian faith. And it was Cardinal Salotti's opinion that, even had she not been a martyr, she still would have been a saint, so holy was her everyday life. The case of Mary Goretti seems to be unique in hagiology. At the time of the beatification, her short and moving story was noticed in the newspaper press of the world, from the London Times downwards. Among the published accounts of her in English are those of Mother C. E. Maguire, Father J. Carr, and Marie C. Burlet. L'Art Sacré, made June 1951, printed some pictures illustrating the iconographical evolution of the saint. Sorry. We've reached the end of July 6th. God bless you all, if you're still listening. Thank you. I'm sending you the peace of Christ, and may you always be happy and joyful in the Lord. And I will be doing a lot more of the Butler's Lives of the Saints for the simple reason that it seems like you like them. Well, I like them, but some of them are pretty weird and fantastic, you know. Like, you really have to say, take them with a pinch of salt, but they're written, they're there by church people through the ages, so we get some surprise ones. Some of them are fantastic. That last one I know very well, but they, in the other books, they don't call her Mary, they call her, I'm sure, Maria or something. So I must say good night and God bless you, and turn off this computer. It's gone to 1 hour, about 40 minutes or something. Gosh, I didn't look at the clock till now. Good night, and it's very late. Okay, I'll probably do much less tomorrow.